South of Egypt, where the Nile narrows between desert banks and dark stone hills, another kingdom gathered itself over many centuries. Its cities were built of mud brick and sandstone. Its rulers were buried beneath steep pyramids, and its merchants moved between inner Africa, the river valley, and the wider ancient world. This is the history of Kush, remembered through Kerma, Napata, and Meroë, and through the long quiet endurance of Nubia. By about 2500 BCE, at Kerma in Upper Nubia, a kingdom had taken shape along the Middle Nile, in a country of narrow green riverbanks, open cattle pasture, and desert tracks leading toward the deeper interior of Africa. Here, where the annual flood laid down dark silt and the river served as both road and lifeline, rulers were able to command not only farmland and herds, but also the slow, valuable movement of goods passing north and south. Kerma grew into a true urban center, with planned quarters and great mud brick monuments known as defufas, rising above the plain. The western defufa, with its heavy walls and tiered mass, still carries the impression of a ceremonial and political heart, a place where authority was made visible in sun-dried brick, shadow, and height. In such a landscape, power was not abstract. It stood in storehouses, in corrals, in river traffic, and in the elevated platforms from which a court could look out across its fields and roads. Its wealth rested on many strands gathered together by the Nile: gold-bearing regions to the east, livestock from the savannah, ebony, ivory, and other southern goods all fed Kerma's prosperity, while Egyptian texts remember a relationship that shifted with the season and the century, moving between commerce, rivalry, and open war. During Egypt's second intermediate period, when authority to the north was divided, Kerma reached the height of its influence, and at times allied with the Hyksos against Egyptian rulers, acting in the diplomacy of the Nile world, rather than merely receiving its pressures. The royal cemetery at Kerma, one of the largest in the Nile Valley, gives this kingdom another kind of presence. Broad tumuli, rich grave goods, sacrificed cattle, and the traces of elaborate funerary rites, all speaking of a courtly culture with its own symbols of power and its own understanding of kingship. Around 1500 BCE, the expanding Egyptian New Kingdom conquered Kerma and absorbed much of Nubia. Yet conquest did not empty the land of its earlier meanings. Egyptian forts, temples, and officials settled into a region where older loyalties, older sacred places, and older memories remained quietly alive beneath imperial rule, like water moving under sand. After long centuries of Egyptian rule in Nubia, a kingdom rose again on the Middle Nile, gathering itself around Napata and the dark, wind-shaped mass of Jebel Barkal. The sandstone outcrop is not large by the measure of mountains, yet it stands with a singular authority above the river plain, its cliffs catching the low sun and its strange pinnacle lending itself to sacred interpretation. Here, the cult of Amun took deep root, and here Kushite rulers found a center that was at once local and universal, a place where imperial forms inherited from Egypt could be reread in a Nubian landscape. From about the 9th to the 8th centuries BCE, the kings of Napata built their power patiently, drawing on Egyptian styles of kingship, temple ritual, and writing, while remaining bound to older networks of kinship, cattle wealth, and southern loyalties that reached beyond the narrow riverbanks into the wider country. In the 8th century BCE, King Paye carried this renewed kingdom northward into Egypt. His victory stela presents the campaign not simply as conquest, but as a correction, a restoration of proper reverence for Amun and proper conduct for kings. In this way, the rulers of what historians call the 25th dynasty governed for nearly a century, from Nubia into Egypt, presenting themselves as heirs to an ancient order that needed tending rather than invention. Shabaka and, above all, Taharqa left the clearest marks of this ambition. Temples were enlarged, sanctuaries restored, columns raised, and inscriptions cut into stone both in Egypt and in Nubia, so that authority seemed to flow with the Nile itself, linking Thebes to Barkal, royal ceremony to the older sacred ground of Kush. The dead, too, were gathered into this renewal. At El Kuru and later at Nuri, royal cemeteries appeared with steep-sided pyramids set above underground chambers, a Nubian revival of an older architectural language long absent from the Nile Valley. Smaller than the pyramids of Old Kingdom Egypt, they were nonetheless exacting monuments, accompanied by painted walls, grave goods, and carefully ordered spaces for the afterlife. In the 7th century BCE, Assyrian armies pressed hard upon Egypt, and Kushite rule there came to an end. Yet the kingdom itself did not vanish with that retreat. Power contracted southward again, and Napata remained a ceremonial heart, its mountains still receiving devotion, even as the slower pull of politics and trade began, over time, to draw the center of gravity toward Meroe. In the later 1st millennium BCE, the weight of Kushite kingship settled more and more firmly at Meroe, in the dry country between the Nile and the Atbara, where thorn scrub, open plain, and narrow belts of cultivation met the long roads of merchants and herders. It was a practical landscape as well as a royal one, better placed for farming than the harsher reaches farther north, and open to caravan traffic moving east toward the Red Sea and south toward regions deeper in Africa. Over time, Meroe became the kingdom's enduring heartland, a place of palaces and temples, domestic quarters, broad reservoirs cut to hold precious rainwater, and great cemetery fields where ranks of steep-sided pyramids rose from the gravel in a geometry at once severe and delicate. Even now, those pyramids stand in clusters against the pale horizon, their angles catching the low sun as if the old court had only recently withdrawn indoors from the heat. The city is often remembered for iron. Around Meroe, dark slag heaps still lie in mounded drifts, the residue of furnaces that once glowed through the evening, fed by charcoal and steady labor. Yet iron was only one strand in a wider fabric of prosperity. Gold, ivory, ebony, animal skins, and other goods passed through Kushite hands, linking the Nile Valley to the Red Sea world and to the African interior, where exchange followed older paths than any empire could fully command. In these same centuries, Kush at Meroe came to look and sound more distinctly itself. Egyptian forms did not disappear, but they were joined by local deities, altered artistic conventions, and the Meroitic script, written on stone, metal, and pottery in signs whose language still reaches us only in fragments. There is something poignant in that partial silence, as if the kingdom remains visible in outline, while much of its own speech stays just beyond hearing. Royal women moved powerfully within this world. Figures remembered by the title Kandake, or Candace, stood close to the center of dynastic life, and Amanirenas is especially associated with the war against Rome in 25 to 22 BCE, after which Kush preserved its independence on terms favorable enough to suggest hard bargaining as much as battlefield resolve. Beyond the capital, places such as Naka and Musawarat es Sufra reveal the texture of this mature Kushite world. Temples set amid open ground, processional ways, hafirs for storing water, and carvings that draw together Egyptian, Nubian, and wider Mediterranean elements without surrendering to any single model. By the 4th century CE, however, Meroe had declined, likely through a combination of changing trade routes, environmental strain, and new regional powers. Later Christian kingdoms inherited parts of its landscape and memory, while the old capitals gradually quieted, their walls broken, their courts emptied, and their pyramids left to the wind and the slow drift of sand. When Kush is left out of the old story of the Nile, the river itself seems narrower than it was. Its temples, furnaces, cemeteries, and desert roads suggest a different picture. Not a shadow at Egypt's edge, but a civilization with its own long memory, still half emerging from sand, stone, and the slow work of archaeology.